Hello and welcome to the Hubble Cast, the podcast that helps you go beyond Earth. I'm Sabah Khamseen and I'll be your host for this podcast. For today's episode, I'll be discussing all things solar system and specifically the planets in our solar system. Firstly, as many of you know, we have 8 planets in our solar system. Nearest to the sun, only rocky materials could withstand the heat from the sun. So for this reason, the first 4 planets, which are Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, are what are known as terrestrial planets. So these are small with solid rocky surfaces. On the other hand, materials we're used to seeing, such as liquid, gas, ice, are settled in the outer regions, and gravity actually pulled these materials together. And that is where we find our gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn, and the ice giants, Uranus and Neptune. Now, we obviously know so much about our home, the Earth, but what about the planets that surround us? To begin with, Mercury is the smallest planet in our solar system, and it's actually only slightly larger than Earth's moon, so you can get an idea of how small it is. From the surface of Mercury, the sun would appear more than 3 times as large as it does when viewed from the Earth. And actually, the sunlight would be as much as 7 times brighter. And despite Mercury being such a small planet, it's actually the fastest planet in our solar system, as it travels through space at nearly 47 kilometers per second, which is just an unfathomable speed, really. And actually, another interesting fact is that Mercury is so close to the sun and it has such a short orbit that the length of a year would only be 88 days, which is just crazy when you think about our year, which is 365 days. Next up is Venus. Now, Venus is often called Earth's twin because it's similar in size and density. But they are definitely not identical twins because there are radical differences between these two worlds. And actually, some people call Venus Earth's toxic twin. It's pretty much because Venus has an extreme surface heat and a very dense and toxic atmosphere. Now, one of my favorite facts about Venus has to do with its days and years. It's very interesting. Since Venus has such fast winds, this causes the atmosphere to drag along the surface of the planet as it circulates, which slows down its rotation. This means that one day on Venus lasts 243 Earth days, which is crazy. But in contrast, it only takes the planet 225 Earth days to complete a year. So this makes a day on Venus longer than a year on Venus, which is very weird. Can you imagine having a year that's shorter than a day? I definitely can't. Venus also holds the title for the hottest planet in our solar system, and many people get confused because obviously Mercury is closer. So even though Mercury is closer to the sun, yellowish clouds of acid trap heat in Venus, which causes a runaway greenhouse gas effect. And this means that surface temperatures on Venus are about 475 degrees Celsius. So you can only imagine how hot it is over on that planet. And lastly, Venus was actually the first planet explored by a spacecraft and was intensely studied early in the history of space exploration. But sadly, due to the intense heat, the spacecraft only survived for a couple of hours. So there needs to be some recalculating done when it comes to visiting Venus. Now, following Venus is the Earth, but this episode is going to target the other planets since we already know so much about Earth. So we're just going to skip the Earth and move on. Mars is the 4th planet from the sun, and it's a dusty, cold desert world with a very thin atmosphere. And Mars is also a dynamic planet with seasons, polar ice caps, canyons, extinct volcanoes. So it's always been a planet that piqued explorers' interests. And even us, as we've seen Mars in many movies and books. So it's definitely been something that has been incorporated into pop culture, which is really interesting as well. And currently, NASA has two rovers known as Curiosity and Perseverance, which are exploring the surface of Mars, and they bring back a lot of information back to Earth for us to study this planet. Mars is also known as the red planet because iron minerals in the soil oxidize and rust, which causes the soil and atmosphere to look red. But when it comes to the atmosphere, Mars has a very thin atmosphere, which is made up of carbon dioxide, argon, and nitrogen, and a small amount of oxygen and water vapor. So, if we were to ever visit, we should definitely bring a spacesuit with us. Now, when it comes to the moons, Mars has 2 moons, but there's still a lot of speculation regarding how these moons have formed. And in terms of life on Mars, as many people call it, at this time, Mars' surface cannot support life as we know it, but current missions are determining Mars' past life and future potential life. After that is our first gas giant, Jupiter. Now, Jupiter has a long history of surprising scientists, all the way back to 1610 when Galileo found the first moon beyond Earth. That discovery changed the way that we see the universe. So, fifth in line from the sun is Jupiter, and it's by far the largest planet in the solar system. And just to give you an idea of how large Jupiter really is, it's actually more than twice as massive as all other planets in our solar system combined, which is very, very massive. And unlike Venus, Jupiter actually has a short day and a long year as it rotates around itself every 10 hours, which is actually even shorter than the Earth day. But it takes about 12 Earth years to complete 1 year on Jupiter. And despite Jupiter being so massive, it's actually made of light elements, as the atmosphere is made of mostly hydrogen and helium. And since Jupiter is very large and has a strong gravitational pull, it has pulled in a lot of space stuff. So this means that many moons were formed around Jupiter. And it actually currently has more than 75 confirmed moons, which when compared to our single moon is really a lot. Now, contrary to popular belief, Jupiter actually has rings. Many people don't know this, as in 1979, the Voyager mission discovered Jupiter's faint ring system. But the rings are faint, as I mentioned, and they don't really show as they're made of dust particles. Now, to one of the most famous parts of Jupiter, the Great Red Spot. Now, the Great Red Spot of Jupiter is nothing but a gigantic storm that's about twice the size of the Earth and has raged for over a century. So all it really is just a storm, but it really is a huge storm since you can see it from outside of the planet and from such great distances. Now, Saturn. Saturn is the 6th planet from the sun and the 2nd largest planet in our solar system. It's also, fun fact, my favorite planet in our solar system, besides Earth, of course. Now, Saturn is unique among the planets. It's not only the only planet to have rings made of chunks of ice and rock, but none are as spectacular or as complicated as Saturn's. Unlike fellow gas giant Jupiter, Saturn is a massive ball made of mostly hydrogen and helium. And since Saturn is a gas giant, it does not have a lot of surface like Earth, but it might have a solid core somewhere in there. But we're not quite sure of anything like that. And an interesting fact is that Saturn is the most distant planet that can be seen with the naked eye. And it's the 5th brightest object in the solar system and is also easily studied through binoculars or a small telescope, which many people don't acknowledge, as you don't really see many people searching for Saturn with their binoculars or a telescope, but you actually can. And what makes Saturn's rings so unique is their structure, as they stretch out more than 120,000 kilometers from the planet, but are amazingly thin as they're only about 20 meters thick. Now, following that is Uranus. Uranus is the 7th planet from the Sun and has the 3rd largest diameter in our solar system. It was the first planet found with the aid of a telescope. And Uranus was discovered in 1781 by the astronomer William Herschel. And although he originally thought it was either a comet or a star, it was 2 years later discovered that this object was a planet. And many people actually underestimate the size of Uranus, as it's about 4 times wider than the Earth. And to give you a little comparison, if Earth was a large apple, Uranus would be the size of a basketball. So it is actually quite big. Not only that, but Uranus is an ice giant. So unlike Jupiter and Saturn, as they are gas giants, Uranus is an ice giant. Most of its mass is hot, dense fluid of icy materials above a small rocky core. And again, as many people don't know, Uranus is another ringed world. It has 13 known rings, and the inner ones are narrow and dark, while the outer ones are brightly colored. It also has 27 moons, which are actually named after characters from the works of William Shakespeare and Alexander Pope. So it's very interesting to see literature combined with space science. But sadly, Uranus is a bit lonely, as Voyager 2 is the only spacecraft to fly by Uranus, and no spacecraft has orbited the distant planet like Jupiter and Saturn. But we do hope to see improvements in this area in the coming years, and obviously with all the technology and development that's happening in our world. We have reached our last planet, which is Neptune. Now, Neptune is a dark, cold planet that is whipped by supersonic winds, as they call them, which makes it the other ice giant in our solar system. It is more than 30 times as far from the sun as Earth, and is the only planet in our solar system which is not visible to the naked eye. It was actually first predicted by mathematics before its discovery, and although not much is known about this planet, its atmosphere is made up of mostly molecules of hydrogen and icy materials. And similar to Uranus, only Voyager 2 ever visited Neptune, and there's no spacecraft that ever orbited this planet. So it's quite similar it's quite similar to Uranus in the sense that there really isn't much discovery happening over there. But we've also got to consider how far away this planet is, and how cold it is over there since it's so far away from the sun. But anyways, moving on. Neptune actually has 5 main rings and 4 more ring arcs, which are clumps of dust and debris likely formed by the gravity of a nearby moon. Now, despite many people disregarding these rings, they do have a remarkable glowy effect in the midst of our dark solar system. Now, Neptune does take the title for the longest year in our solar system, as it only takes Neptune actually 16 hours to rotate once around itself and complete a day, but it takes 165 Earth years for it to orbit the sun and complete a year. And that is just because of how big its orbit is and how far away it is from the sun, so it has quite a large orbit. That is all for today's episode. I do hope you enjoyed this episode and had fun as you got to learn more about our lovely and amazing solar system. Do make sure to stay tuned for the next episodes, and goodbye.